The informative speech and informative speaking in general are one of the main types of speeches you might be asked to give. But when putting together an informative speech, what types are there? What are some things you should think about? Well, the various types of informative speech and some good basic guidelines for making a solid informative speech are the subject of today's video. So, speaking to inform, one of our three main types of speeches, as you remember, those are to inform, to persuade, or to entertain. So, when you are speaking to inform, what do you need to keep in mind in order to do it effectively? Well, first off, what are you supposed to be doing? An informative speech is there to convey knowledge and understanding. That's it. You are teaching people about something. That's it. You're not making an argument. You're not trying to get people to do A, B, or C. You're just telling them about something. And again, do not make an argument. Every semester, I always have students who wind up giving a persuasive speech for the informative. Just because you stick to inform in front of your specific purpose does not make it a informative speech. Okay, if your speech is to inform my audience on the history of Kentucky Fried Chicken, yeah, that's informative. But to inform my audience on why Kentucky Fried Chicken is better than Popeyes, that's persuasive. Okay, you're actively trying to change people's behavior or just giving one side, you can do pros and cons. You can't just do all cons or all pros. That's making an argument. That's being persuasive. So remember, your goal is to teach and give information, not to make an argument. So what are the various types of informative speeches? Okay, any type of informative speech you give minimally will fall into one of these types. Sometimes you may very well have a hybrid of two or three of them. But when you have a good topic for your informative speech, look at these types and say, which one is this? And if it doesn't fall into one of these types, chances are it's not an informative speech. It's more than likely a persuasive. So what are these various types? Well, first off, are speeches about objects. Anything visible or tangible in form. Anything you could reach out and grab, metaphorically, you could do a speech on. All right. For example, in this area of northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, I've had students give object speeches about the Brent Spence Bridge, the Big Mac Bridge, Paul Brown Stadium, the Museum Center, Kings Island, Great Wolf Lodge, the Red Stadium. Those are all objects. You can do one about the Ohio River. You could do one about anything, right? I've had speeches about objects as far as basketballs and fishing rods. Any of those will work. And when you're giving a speech about an object, typically it falls into one or the other, or a combination of two, of telling us about the parts of the object or how it's made or how it was developed. Okay, that's typically how an object speech works. For example, I had a student was giving his informative speech about basketballs, and he did the parts. His first main point was the outer layer of the basketball, what those are made out of, and then he had the adhesive that they use under the outer layer. And then his third main point was he talked about the air bladder in the middle. Okay, so speech is about objects. Good, safe, just telling us how it's made or its history or how to use it. Perfect ways to give a informative speech about an object. Now, our next speech type for informative speaking is a process speech. Okay, now, when it comes to process speeches, there are typically two main houses, if you will, of process speeches. Okay. First one is you can give a speech about a process that we know exists. We see the benefits of it or we see the result of it, but maybe we're not sure exactly how it works. And you could teach us about how that process works. For example, how does a computer save files? I don't know. I hit save and it does it. For all I know, there could be little gremlins in there putting stuff on wooden tablets. I don't know. Okay, but that's a process that we know exists, but maybe we're not sure how it works. And you could teach us about how that works. How does a nuclear power plant create power? I don't know, it just does. Again, you could tell us how that works, okay? So explain to us the process of something we know exists, but maybe we're not sure how it actually does what it does. That's one of the houses. Now, the second major house in process speeches, and If you are stuck for a topic for your informative speech, this is my go-to recommendation consistently. That second major house in process speeches is a how-to speech, where you teach us, the audience, how to do something. And I say this as my recommendation because every single one of you knows how to do something, whatever that is. Okay? And I have had these across the board, some very common ones that are popular. How to make fill in the blank food dish has always been a popular one. How to take care of fill in the blank pet, also been popular. How to play blank instrument. What to do or get into blank hobby. The basics of how to do blank in sports. Like you couldn't do how to play basketball, but you could do the basics of how to shoot a free throw. You could do that. Those are all process. And I've had everything from how to play the theremin to how to start comic book collecting to how to eat spaghetti the authentic Italian way. Okay, those are all process speeches. And as you can guess, they probably tend to go in chronological order where you walk us through the process. So again, you can tell us about a process we know exists, but maybe don't know how it works. Or you can teach us how to do something. And that's very often if you're stuck, this is my default recommendation, is go to a how-to type of speech. The next type of informative speech is a speech about an event. Anything that happens or is regarded as happening, some type of event you can do a speech on. Now, maybe you do a hybrid process event where you talk about how to plan a trip to that event or what to do at said event, whatever it is. Maybe you talk about the history of the event. Maybe you talk about 3 main things that happen at the event, okay? Those are all good. And again, as long as you're focusing on those, you're fine. Like let's take an event in this Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati area. Reds opening day. Well, what happens on Reds opening day? Well, there's typically a parade, and then there's typically some kind of meet the player thing. And then lastly, there's the game. 3 points right there. You can tell about the parade, how it started, what it does. Second, meet the players, what you need to do to get there, how early to get, and so forth. And then the game, how to get tickets, good places to see it. Done. And there's all kinds of events. I mean, just in this area alone, I mean, there's the WEBN fireworks show, Oktoberfest, GetaFest. In the state as in general in Kentucky, there's the Kentucky Derby. There's the race out that typically happens on here in Boone. Any type of thing like that is an event you could tell us the history of or the attributes of. Those make for a great informative speech. And the last one, and probably the most complex, if you will, is a concept, some sort of theory, idea, belief, or notion. And you can explain what the main principles are behind that concept, theory, or belief. All right. For example, I often tell students, if you want to do this one, think about your majors and think about what concepts or theories have you learned in your major. And you can pick one of those. For example, I had a student who was a criminal justice major and did his informative speech on the concept of due process. And so we talked about what due process meant, how it came about, how it had evolved over the years, and the court cases that did that. And that was perfectly fine. I had a nursing student do something similar with the concept of do no harm and how that has evolved and changed over time. Okay, so that's some examples of concept speeches that you can do. They're probably the more difficult of the 4 just because they tend to be more vague at the start, but they're perfectly legit. So again, I don't care which one of these 4 your informative speech is, as long as it falls into one of them. It can be a hybrid of 2 or 3. Those perfectly fine too. But if you have your topic and it doesn't fit into one of these, chances are you don't have an informative speech. You're probably doing a persuasive speech that you're trying to just mask as an informative. So now that you understand the types, what are some guidelines for good informative speaking? Well, first off, and this is a huge one, do not overestimate what the audience knows. Every semester, I have a student that is having a hard time coming up with a topic, and I'll suggest, how to, and they'll be like, well, I don't know how to do anything. Well, I'm like, yeah, you do. But you know how to cook something? Like, well, yeah, I know how to make hot dogs, but everybody knows how to make hot dogs. Really? You know everybody? Do not overestimate what they know. All right? Imagine yourself giving this speech to somebody who doesn't have any clue what it is. and develop it based on that. Don't overestimate what they know, but you still need to relate the subject to the audience. Get them interested. Why should they pay attention? You're going to do hot dogs, explain. You ever had to make dinner and you need something quick and easy that your kids will love? Hot dogs, something like that makes them want to pay attention. So make sure you relate to your audience and say why they should pay attention. Also, don't be too technical. This kind of goes with this idea of, yeah, you're there to convey information and teach the audience, but you want to keep in mind where they're at versus where you need them to be. All right. If their knowledge level is here and you're trying to get them to here, that's fine. You can probably do that. But if it's like this, that's too much. So don't be too technical and avoid abstractions. Don't say, to inform my audience on why fishing is great. Well, what does that mean? Said, inform my audience on how to take up inform my audience how to take up the healthy hobby of fishing is better. Right? So avoid those abstractions. So again, keep in mind these guidelines and these types, and this will help you give a great informative speech. So informative speaking isn't hard. It's one of our three main categories. Big takeaways are make sure whatever topic you pick fits one of those categories: objects, processes, events, or concepts, and make sure you follow those guidelines. And by all means, don't be persuading people. It's just to teach people about something. You can give the pros and cons. You can give the advantages and disadvantages. But if you just tell us why something is horrible or why something is great, that's not informative. That's persuasive. If you follow these guidelines, you'll stay in that lane of informative and give a great informative speech.